He was the dapper Don, the Teflon Don. John Gotti, head of the Gambino crime family, seemed untouchable. He ruled New York City's underworld with an iron fist, his tailored suits and confident swagger a stark contrast to the brutality of his crimes. News cameras loved him, capturing his every move as he walked free from courtrooms, acquitted of charges time and time again. But Gotti's luck ran out. In 1992, he was convicted of racketeering and murder. Gone were the days of power lunches and backroom deals. Gotti's new home was ADX Florence, a Supermax prison in Colorado. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, ADX Florence housed the nation's most dangerous criminals. For John Gotti, the man who once commanded an army of mobsters, it was a fall from grace of epic proportions. From the opulent world of organized crime, Gotti was thrust into a world of concrete and steel, stripped of his designer suits and expensive cigars. This is the story of John Gotti's life inside Supermax, a stark reminder that even the most powerful can fall. ADX Florence. The name alone sent shivers down the spines of convicted criminals. Built to hold those deemed too dangerous for even maximum security prisons, ADX Florence was a place where hope went to die. Its very design was intended to break the human spirit, to isolate and confine, to punish and deter. For inmates like John Gotti, used to the relative freedom of less secure facilities, arriving at ADX Florence was a shock to the system. Gone were the prison yards, the communal meals, the limited interactions with the outside world. In their place was a world of concrete and steel, where every aspect of life was controlled and monitored. Security at ADX Florence was relentless. Inmates spent 23 hours a day locked in their cells, their only glimpse of the outside world a narrow window that offered a sliver of sky. The message was clear: this was a place of punishment, not rehabilitation. The clang of metal on metal. That was the sound that now marked the beginning and end of John Gotti's days. Gone was the freedom to set his own schedule, to conduct business, to enjoy the company of others. Life in ADX Florence revolved around a rigid routine, a monotonous cycle designed to eliminate any sense of autonomy. Each morning, Gotti's cell door would slide open with a deafening clang, revealing a breakfast tray that had already been pushed through a slot in the steel door. Cold cereal, fruit, and milk, all carefully portioned and inspected for contraband. After breakfast, Gotti might have been granted a brief period of exercise in a small concrete enclosure. This was solitary confinement, a chance to pace back and forth like a caged animal, the high concrete walls blocking out the sun and the sky. The rest of the day was spent in his cell, the only sounds the hum of the ventilation system and the occasional shouts of other inmates echoing down the corridor. Every aspect of ADX Florence was designed to minimize human contact and reinforce the sense of isolation. The cells, each measuring 7 by 12 feet, were Spartan and unforgiving. Concrete floors and walls painted a drab beige gave the impression of a tomb. A single bed, bolted to the floor, a stainless steel toilet and sink combination, and a small fixed desk and stool were the only furnishings. The cell door, a solid slab of steel with a narrow window covered in thick mesh, was a constant reminder of Gotti's confinement. It was through this slot that meals were delivered, mail passed through, and communication with guards conducted via intercom. Natural light was a luxury in ADX Florence. A single window, narrow and placed high on the wall, offered a glimpse of the sky but little else. The lack of natural light disrupted sleep patterns and contributed to a sense of disorientation. Every sound from the clang of the cell door to the distant shouts of other inmates seemed amplified in the confined space. For a man like John Gotti, used to the constant buzz of New York City, the silence of ADX Florence was deafening. Gone were the familiar sounds of traffic and conversation, replaced by an eerie quiet that seemed to press in on him from all sides. This was sensory deprivation, a key element of the Supermax experience, and it was designed to break down even the strongest of wills. The lack of visual stimulation was equally jarring. The view from Gotti's cell, a sliver of sky framed by concrete and steel, offered no relief. The human eye craves variety, stimulation, and the monotony of his surroundings took a toll on his perception. Human touch, once so commonplace, was now a distant memory. The guards clad in riot gear during their infrequent interactions were not a source of comfort. Physical contact was strictly forbidden, a rule enforced with brutal efficiency. The absence of touch, of human warmth, left Gotti feeling empty and alone, a prisoner in his own body as much as in his cell. In the outside world, John Gotti thrived on control. He was the boss, the one who called the shots, the man who inspired fear and respect in equal measure. But within the confines of ADX Florence, such power dynamics were meaningless. Here the guards held all the cards, their authority absolute and unquestioned. Every aspect of Gotti's life was controlled, from the moment he woke to the moment he was locked back in his cell at night. The food he ate, the clothes he wore, the books he read, all were chosen for him. Even the most mundane activities like showering or using the toilet were subject to strict schedules and regulations. This loss of control was perhaps the most difficult adjustment for Gotti. The message was clear. In ADX Florence, resistance was futile. In the desolate landscape of ADX Florence, human interaction, however fleeting, became a precious commodity. For inmates like Gotti, starved of companionship and meaningful connection, even the briefest exchange with a guard or a fellow inmate could offer a flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Conversations with guards, often conducted through the thick steel doors of their cells, were usually limited to basic necessities: requests for medication, complaints about cell conditions, or inquiries about mail. Yet, even these brief interactions offered a chance to hear another human voice, to break the monotony of solitary confinement. Letters from family and friends, carefully screened by prison officials, became a lifeline to the outside world. These letters, often read and reread until the paper was thin, were a source of comfort and despair, reminding Gotti of all that he had lost. The long-term effects of solitary confinement are well documented. Deprived of human interaction, of sensory stimulation, and of any sense of autonomy, the human mind begins to unravel. John Gotti, despite his tough exterior and his history of violence, was not immune to the psychological toll of Supermax confinement. The once sharp mind, known for its cunning and strategic thinking, began to dull. Gotti found it difficult to concentrate, his thoughts often drifting into a fog of confusion and despair. His short-term memory suffered, and he would often repeat himself, his words a jumbled echo of past conversations. The man who had once been so sure of himself, so in control of his emotions, became increasingly volatile. Outbursts of anger, often directed at guards or at the walls themselves, became more frequent. These fits of rage, a manifestation of his frustration and helplessness, offered no release, only serving to deepen his isolation. The prison, it seemed, was slowly crushing his spirit. We can only speculate about what went through John Gotti's mind during his long years in solitary confinement. Did he regret his life of crime, the choices that led him to this desolate place? Did he yearn for his family, for the sounds and smells of his old neighborhood, for the taste of freedom? Perhaps he found solace in memories, replaying past victories and triumphs in his mind. Or maybe he retreated into a world of fantasy, escaping the harsh reality of his surroundings through daydreams and delusions. The human mind is a complex and resilient organ, capable of remarkable adaptations in the face of adversity. We do know that Gotti fought his confinement every step of the way. These legal battles, though ultimately unsuccessful, gave Gotti a sense of purpose, a way to channel his anger and frustration. John Gotti died in prison in 2002, succumbing to throat cancer after a decade of Supermax confinement. His death, while not unexpected, sparked a debate about the effectiveness and morality of solitary confinement. Was this the kind of justice we wanted for even the most hardened criminals, a slow, agonizing death sentence by isolation? Gotti's case is not unique. Across the United States, thousands of inmates languish in Supermax prisons, subjected to conditions that many experts consider to be cruel and unusual punishment. The psychological damage inflicted by prolonged solitary confinement is well documented, with lasting effects that often extend beyond an inmate's release. Critics argue that Supermax prisons are counterproductive, creating more problems than they solve. The story of John Gotti's life in Supermax is a stark reminder of the human cost of our criminal justice system. While Gotti's crimes were undeniably heinous, his punishment raises important questions about the limits of retribution and the rehabilitative goals of incarceration. Solitary confinement, once reserved for the most dangerous criminals, has become increasingly commonplace in the United States. It's used not only in Supermax prisons like ADX Florence, but also in county jails and state prisons across the country. In many cases, inmates are placed in solitary confinement for minor infractions, such as talking back to a guard or possessing contraband. The overuse of solitary confinement has devastating consequences. We must ensure that our pursuit of justice does not come at the expense of our humanity.